the real sense of entrepreneurship or the development came to India only in the late 2000s. NEC has been seriously involved in the regional development, and two more significant efforts initiated in 1973. Good morning and welcome to the second session of Unit 2. Here we are going to talk about the government institutions that are offering the EDP program. Now, why this is important is that many of us might not know the number of institutes, the number of the training institutes or the program facilitators who give us this EDP program as a training so that we are able to become successful entrepreneurs. So let's go forward and see what are all the government facilities that have been created for us in order to become a successful entrepreneur. So starting here, the government and financial institutions have started to think in terms of developing entrepreneurship throughout the country through training programs. Now, let me tell you, in India, entrepreneurship is not at all new because we started somewhere in the year 1970s itself. Of course, if you ask me the question, sir, in 1970, if you would have started, that's 50 years back, by now India should have become the most advanced industrial nation. We should have all probably the best GDP in the world, the maximum in terms of the FDI and every other factor. But then what happened is that the real sense of entrepreneurship or the development came to India only in the late 2000s. So the first 30 years, we were actually trying to inculcate the idea of entrepreneurship in probably every single human being. Why? Because if you start looking into entrepreneurship in India, probably that was not a choice that was made by most of the citizens in our country. If you look in the 1970s time period, that was the period where the Nationalization Act was brought into picture. All the banks, all the government institutions were nationalized and people started concentrating on the jobs that were provided by the government because they were more secured and they were providing stability and a good salary altogether. So what was happening in this process is that people never wanted to take a risk, start business and get yourself stuck in that dilemma altogether. People were more confident about just working under somebody at a 10 to 5 or a 9 to 5 job, earning the money that was easily available. But then for the government, it was quite challenging because they were not able to convince the youngsters at that point of time, tell them that entrepreneurship would be tomorrow's trend that will drive the demand in the economy, that will drive employment in the economy. So everything was quite in a different shape and order, and we needed a lot of push, we needed a lot of thrust altogether in terms of making this program successful. But anyways, government did not stop its effort in terms of making entrepreneurship as a successful program or as a mandatory program. They kept on pressurizing in such a manner that today EDP has not only become a subject in your syllabus, but it has also become the order of the new life. So when you move forward, you will also try to understand that it was because of the Gujarat Industrial Investment Corporation, which was the first. It started as a 3-month training program way back in 1970. Now, if you just relate India back in terms of history and in terms of the mentality of the people, probably Gujarat, Maharashtra, Punjab were one of those countries, one of those states, which I would like to say, in our country, which had actually gone forward in terms of entrepreneurship. And not to forget, Gujarat being a community that is run by successful businessmen by itself, they already had the entrepreneurship ideology in their mindset. They always believed that entrepreneurship is a way of life. So they didn't have to undergo any formal training or any kind of formalities altogether in order to start a business. They just knew the nag and tag of it. They also knew that how to take it forward. And in any kind of business, be it be textiles, or it might be jewelry, or we are talking about steel, or we are talking about oil and gas, the Gujarat community had their presence. So what happened here is that entrepreneurship is something that we need to really learn from them. And as rightly said, they were the first industrial investment factor altogether in order to make this entrepreneurship training as a foremost thinking way back in 1970s itself. Followed by the objectives was very, very simple. Establishment of small scale enterprises, understanding its management, and to earn profits out of it. By the later half of 1970, the EDP had spread to other parts of the country also. Now, when you look here, it is very, very interesting for all of us to understand that when the Gujarat Industrial Investment Corporation came into picture, their ideology was to establish that small scale industry. They were not interested at that point of time to just start up with a Reliance or Infosys or probably with a HDFC Bank altogether. Their ideology was very, very simple. Their ideology was to see that whether they are able to establish small scale industries or small scale setup all across them. Why? Because when you start setting up this, when you start setting up these factors of small scale industries and medium scale industries together, you will be able to understand and realize on the factor that we are actually trying to build a system which is trying to promote employment, which is trying to promote consumption and demand in the economy. Because when you start those small scale industries, automatically people will start joining hands with you, and they will also believe on the factor that we need to create our own self-sustainability. So the committee and the members were very, very clear about this factor that we have to start all those small scale industry, make them grow, get onto the stage where they become self-reliant or self-sustainable in nature, provide a management structure to it, and start building up the economy. By the late 1970s, say about 78, 79 I'm talking about, the concept of this EDP training program started spreading across the different parts of the country. Now, what is very interesting here is that with having about 28, 29 states across India with 7 union territories, now our country is large by size and by diversity. We are a country where we have millions of people who have different traditions, culture, language, and ideologies. So what happens here is that when you want to convey a message, when you want to convey your thought process to somebody in terms of building up an entrepreneurship development program or in terms of bringing in a revolutionary thought process, it is not that easy. It needs to take its own course of time in terms of penetrating into the minds of the customer, in terms of penetrating into minds of the people, making them understand the need and importance of entrepreneurship. Now, moving forward, what was the first step forward that we started keeping? The first step was that a major initiative to foster economic development in Northeast India took place. Now, that's quite interesting, with the establishment of the Northeastern Council in 1972. Now, the objective of NEC was to promote economic development that is in the northeastern side and to come with an interstate factors so that the economic development is happening across the northeastern region and then get attached to the mainstream of the country. Now, that was a very, very novel idea which I would like to talk about. Now, one side, when you talk about the western hemisphere of India, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Goa, or probably, when you even include Rajasthan as a matter of factor there. These were all states which were into the era of industrialization. They have people who are born entrepreneurs, born businessmen. Why? Because business runs in their blood, runs in their DNA. But when you have a comparison, a stark comparison between the western part and the eastern part altogether, there is a very big question mark. You would not be able to easily talk about entrepreneurship in the year 1970s in Mizoram, Manipur, Meghalaya, Assam, or probably in Nagaland and other places. Why? Because they didn't even have this ideology. They were not even much educated. They didn't have that exposure altogether to understand what is entrepreneurship. So when the Northeastern Council was established in the year 1972, the ideology was to bring the Eastern Hemisphere back into the mainstream of the country so that everybody is able to contribute equally for the development of the economy. Now, when you look at one part of the country which is growing up because of the business needs, because of the innovations and the challenge altogether, the other side of the country remains completely stagnant. It does not have much of growth. It feels that, you need an external push altogether. So that is where, if you see here, the Northeastern Council came as a powerful weapon, as a potent weapon altogether, which was able to take forward the entrepreneurship idea. Further, what they were able to do here is that, as a matter of greatest satisfaction, NEC has been seriously involved in the regional development, and two more significant efforts initiated in 1973 in order to move forward with the economic backwardness that was available in the region. Now, most of the time when we talk about places like Darjeeling, Meghalaya, Shillong and all those kind of places, or probably, when I talk about Sikkim, Gangtok and all those places, the first thing that comes to your mind is a very, very beautiful natural scenery. Why? Because these places are blessed by God in terms of tourism, in terms of the ideology of seeing the nature's beauty. But then, what is going to be the economic development in those countries? Why is that most of the people from that particular region migrated to other parts of India in search of job or in search of better life? The question and the answer is very, very simple, because the question tries to focus on employment and the answer is also on the employment factor. Employment was not being generated in those areas. So people felt that they need to come out of their home state, start looking for places where there are multiple opportunities provided. Over a period of time, the Northeastern Council also started understanding the economic backwardness that is happening in their region, that is happening in their place, is primarily due to the factor that they are not being able to create jobs, they are not being able to create a dynamic society, a factor where people are able to create their own business, create their own living lifestyle. So what was their ideology here is that take entrepreneurship seriously and start working on the regional economic development. Make it in such a manner that even starting from the tea plantation business to probably all these small scale industries that are available in that sector to become more viable, to become more industrialized, and they are able to give jobs to the local youth. That is why the Northeastern Council started becoming more flourishing altogether in this coming years. And after 1973, they took a large initiative in terms of making the business more dynamic, followed by the state-run centers. Now, when we talk about the national level, we also need to know what has been happening at the state level by the government institutions. Now, when you talk about the state level entrepreneurship development model, there were a lot of plans that were evolved, that were developed all together as a result of the SIET, or what I would say that the State Industrial Entrepreneurship Training Institutes altogether. Why was that? Is because every single state had a realization that entrepreneurship development is a multidisciplinary task and it's a long-range plan. It should be well executed and coordinated so that you get support to all the young people. Now, if you look into the state of Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Maharashtra, or probably Madhya Pradesh or any other states in India, Every single state has got their own entrepreneurship development cell, which is trying to promote the concept of entrepreneur and how to help him in terms of bringing up the business. This is not something just as a national plan, but this, I would call it as a local plan, a plan at your own center, at your own level. Every state dreams about this factor that their state should have 100% employment. There should not be a single person who should be in a shadow employment or in an unemployment zone altogether. The only way to overcome this challenge is that you start promoting entrepreneurship at whatever level that is possible. So with the limited resources, with the limited opportunities, and with the ideas that are coming out from the entrepreneurs, you need to start creating a program. You need to start focusing in such a manner that you are able to create a betterment for the people. So what is happening here, what is getting into the thought process here altogether is that we need to start creating a setup, we need to start creating an ideology which will start going forward in terms of building up the components, in terms of building up the setup altogether. So we are not going to rest back, we are not going to just stay back in terms of just creating some theoretical programs or cell, but we are going to go into the factor of creating that local organizations to initiate the support and potential up to the break-even stage. We are going to come into an interdisciplinary approach where we are going to make this program across all the verticals. They started providing a strong information support with training coupled as the most important instrument and followed by institutional financing. So this was understood by the state-driven organizations that they need to take it forward and they need to build it as a system by themselves. So that is where this entire program run by the state enterprises started picking up the steam and they started becoming the organizations of future. Followed by the expansion plans. What are the expansion plans altogether that was done? Inspired by the influence and success of CED, that's the Center for Entrepreneurship Development, Ahmedabad, the national level institutions like IDBI, IFCI, ICICI, and SBI, with an active support from the Gujarat government, sponsored a nation resource organization called as EDI, called as the Entrepreneurship Development Institute in Ahmedabad in 1983. This is a premier institute which tries to focus upon entrepreneurship, which tries to tell them what are the programs, what are the training methodologies that you need to set up very good young dynamic entrepreneurs across India. Now, if you look into this institute, it is entrusted with the responsibility of extension and institutionalization of the entrepreneurship development activity. This is a very multi-focused and a very dynamic and a vibrant organization which has got connections probably at every corner, at every part of the world, and it's connected and financed by some of the best minds in the system who are running this program. So what they tend to do, or what they tend to understand, is that how to build a systematic institute, how to build a systematic program that will help in the entrepreneurship development, that will help in the entrepreneurship journey altogether. So that's why this is being considered to be a very successful institute, and it has been trying to come up with programs which are very dynamic and industrialization altogether. Now, at the same time, in the establishment of EDI in 1983, the government also established the National Institute of Entrepreneurship and Small Business, what we call it as the NIESBUD. Now, that is one of the most important things that you can talk about in terms of the small business development. Now, that was also created in order to coordinate the development activities of the country. So if you're able to see here, with the creation of factors coming into picture, all these things started coordinating one versus the other, so that entrepreneurship at one day will become the mainstream, will become the thought for life. Moving forward, we also talk about the development of the EDP institutes. Now, when you start looking at states, especially like Bihar, Goa, Gujarat, Himachal Pradesh, Jammu, Kashmir, probably I could include all the 29 states of India, where we are going to see that you have an entrepreneurship cell which is trying to promote entrepreneurship, and it is trying to become the order of the day. Why? Because both at the state level and at the national level, there are a lot of financial institutions and organizations who have come forward today, who have tried to understand the need and development of entrepreneurship. They are joining hands with a lot of state government run enterprises because they want them to develop, they want to become futuristic leaders altogether. So that's why I would say that the establishment factor of these particular activities have becoming really, really important, and we need to move forward with this thought process. Accordingly, now when you start studying about this factor, there are about 686 organizations which are involved in conducting EDPs in the country, which have imparted training to thousands of people across hundreds of EDP. So this is becoming really interesting today to talk about, because these are the factors, these are the centers today which are becoming the launch pad for hundreds and thousands of people across India to become successful entrepreneurs. Now you can see that from the 1970s to the 2000s, what we are talking today, entrepreneurship is no more a restricted subject, a restricted language. It is going to become the thought process of every single Indian who wants to transform the nation, who wants to create an identity for himself, and who wants to become a future business leader. With this, I come to the end of this session. I hope and believe all the information provided is of a high help and a resource to you. In the coming sessions, we are going to talk about certain specific institutes in India which have been promoting EDP, and we are also going to talk about some of the EDP factors. Until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me on this wonderful session.